Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, March 3rd, 2025, with senior San Francisco Giants MLB.com reporter, writer Maria Guardado. Maria has been on the Giants beat for many years. Um, just for some housekeeping, our next meeting will be next Wednesday with Barry Bloom. Another person will be discussing spring training. Then hopefully the following week, tentatively, Susan Slusser, and then we have Roger Munter before the opener on that Thursday. Roger will be speaking the Wednesday night before. Um, what else could I tell you? I'm going to introduce Maria to our group. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria Guardado. Welcome to the New York Giants Preservation Society. Before we get started, Maria has never been on, so I want to just tell her about us. We're not all nuts. First of all, we are not.
Tell me what?
Mike, turn off your talker there, your speaker. We are not the lunatic fringe, so please be aware of that. I know that was a big Brian Sabian quote, but we are not that. We are dedicated to preserving the history of the New York baseball giants. Uh, we are from all over the country. There are people here from Arizona, sometimes Alaska, New York, San Francisco, New Jersey, and other places around the country. Um, Most of the reason for this group being in existence is because of Willie Mays. Most of the people, when the Giants left New York to go to San Francisco, stayed San Francisco Giant fans due to the Say Hey Kid. And I would venture that 95% of the people in this group still root for the San Francisco Giants. So, Maria, before you start just telling us about the progress of the team in spring training, why don't you just let us know about your career and how you got this wonderful opportunity to speak about our favorite team?
Sure. And first of all, I just wanted to thank Gary for extending the invitation and for all of you for logging on. It's not too often that we get to kind of have this direct interaction with fans. So, this is a really cool opportunity for me. Yeah, as Gary mentioned, I've been covering the Giants since 2019 for MLB.com. Before that, I was actually covering the Angels. So I did 2 years there. But I'm actually a Bay Area native, so I was always kind of, hoping to have an opportunity to come back to the Bay Area at some point in my career. So when my predecessor, Chris Staff, kind of wanted to move off the beat, travel a little bit less, that's when I kind of, they called me and asked if I was interested in coming to cover the Giants, and I was like, yeah, of course. So that's when that happened in 2019. And before that, I actually did begin my career in New York. I got my first job in journalism at the Star Ledger in New Jersey. So I actually did some Mets and Yankees coverage for a couple years, and was actually the Mets beat writer for 1 year in 2016 before MLB.com hired me to cover the Angels in 2017. So that's kind of how, that was a little bit about my career path, how I ended up uh, coming over to cover the Giants.
Wonderful. What I think we should do tonight is why don't you give us your appraisal of what you've seen so far this year, and then we're going to open it up to questions and we'll go from there. How does that sound?
That sounds perfect. Yeah, I mean, big off season for the Giants. Obviously, there was a big leadership change with Buster Posey coming in to replace Farhan Zaidi as the team's new president of baseball operations. It was. I think we all kind of got a sense that there was going to be some sort of change at the top, just because the team had kind of, obviously underperformed for 3 years or so. And it seemed like it was kind of time for a change. I personally didn't see, Buster's ascension coming. I think that, I was really surprised that he kind of wanted to come in and take on that responsibility. But I think it just kind of shows that, he's really invested and obviously really cares about the future of this organization. So, obviously a big change there. And, you saw, that he's willing to kind of go. He obviously his first big move was going out and getting Willie Adames. And that was kind of the team's biggest need, I think, going into the winter. And he kind of addressed that by going out and getting the best free agent shortstop available in Adames. And I think that that's going to be a really big piece for this team moving forward. I think that the Giants obviously kind of struggled to find stability at that position after Brandon Crawford, you know, after his contract expired and then after he retired. So I think it was really important for them to kind of just find a guy who could play every day and also be an impact bat in the lineup. So I think that he's going to be a really key piece of the future moving forward, kind of another building block for the team. And then obviously bringing in Justin Verlander, who is coming in, or he's coming off kind of probably his the worst season of his career. He just turned 42 last month, but I think he still kind of has a lot to offer. And he's obviously really hungry to kind of uh, bounce back and be the guy that he's been throughout his illustrious career, especially since he kind of has this ongoing quest to reach 300 wins. And he might be the last guy who does that. So he's obviously someone who's still really extremely motivated, and I think has already been a really positive influence in the clubhouse. He's almost like a third pitching coach at this point. You see him being really hands-on with a lot of the young starters in the clubhouse, offering tips whenever he can. So he's already someone who I think he's going to be really interesting to follow. And I think he seems to be lined up to be the number two starter. So I think that just shows you that the Giants are, they didn't just bring him in to be a mentor. They really believe that he still has a lot left in the tank. So that's kind of how where things stand with the new guys. But overall, I mean, for the most part, it's a really similar team to what we saw last year. It's some veterans like Mike Yastrzemski, William Flores, and Lamont Wade. But you also have this kind of young core of position players who are going to be looking to take steps forward, whether it be Elliot Ramos, Jung-Hoo Lee, Tyler Fitzgerald. So I think that there's some upside there. Obviously they're in a really tough division, so they're gonna have their work cut out for them because it seems like winning the division is gonna be really tough just with what the Dodgers have. So, if anything, they're gonna be probably more so going for a wild card berth, but you never know what's gonna happen. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting storylines and players that are gonna be cool to follow. So yeah, that's kind of my 1,000-foot view of where the team stands right now. But I'm really curious to know what you guys want to know because our jobs is to keep you informed. So I'm curious to see what you have for me.
Well, I'm going to start the questioning off, but first I want to ask you, you started in 2016, you said?
2019 on the
20,
Giants.
have you seen a change with the more acceptance of women, around baseball and around sports in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like I was really spoiled growing up in the Bay Area just because I feel like, my entire life it was like Susan Slusser on the A's, and then Jane Lee was also on the A's. She used to write for MLB.com. So it never really like occurred to me that it was a really male dominated industry. Once I actually, got to had an opportunity to work professionally, I did kind of realize that, I was in the minority. But no, I think for the most part, it's been pretty good. I mean, I feel like the players have, they've been pretty respectful for the most part. And I mean, like I said, I'm really lucky. I feel like even since I broke into the industry, I feel like there's really been there's been a lot more women who have now kind of followed this career path and are now working in this as well. I mean, just on the Giants beat alone, it's me, it's Susan, it's Shayna Rubin. So there are a lot of, and Janie McCauley from the AP is there as well. And so like, we have like a really good yeah, core of women who are doing this. And Susan, I credit her a lot for this. I mean, she's been doing this forever. She's a legend. I think she was definitely one of the people who kind of blazed that path for us. So yeah, I mean, I think that it has been different, and like when I was in Los Angeles, there actually weren't. I didn't really have that same support network, I suppose, but no, it's been good. I don't think. I think it's. I feel like it hasn't been held against me that I'm a woman when working this. So no, I think it's. I think we're in a good spot when it comes to that type of situation.
That's great to hear. All right, I'm going to start you off. Um, I always like when a team is going young. My question to you to start off, Jordan Hicks, who I think is a very good pitcher. How do you feel about him being in the rotation, which is going to cost one of the other? They're saying three basically rookies. Kyle Harrison's not, but with Roop and Birdsong. Do you feel that Hicks would be, better slated to be a late man? And that would free up an extra spot in the rotation for one of these young guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And it is interesting because he's obviously someone who was a reliever for most of his career until the Giants gave him that opportunity to start last year. But he said he's been pretty adamant. That's always been his dream. The reason that he kind of broke in as a reliever is because he was so good and throwing, 100 miles per hour in the minor leagues, and that's kind of how the Cardinals just had a spot for him in the bullpen. But he always wanted to be a starter, and he finally got that shot with the Giants last year. And for the first 2 months, he was actually really good. I think he had like a 2.7 ERA, something like that. But then, after that, you just saw the workload catch up to him. He had never pitched that many innings in his career, and it really obviously took a toll on him on the mound. And that's kind of what prompted the Giants to move him back to the bullpen in the second half. But even with the kind of, obviously Farhan Zaidi was the guy who gave him that 4-year contract. But even with the leadership change, it was, Buster Posey came in on the first day of spring training and said Jordan is in the rotation. So I think that Hicks, to his credit, has really kind of worked really hard this offseason to kind of show them that he does have the kind of that stamina that he needs going into his second season as a starter. So he added like 15 pounds of muscle over the winter. He was working out in San Francisco the entire offseason. And he really feels like he kind of just has a stronger base, especially in his legs to kind of be able to sustain that workload moving forward. So I think the Giants are going to give him a chance to open the season in the rotation. But yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of going to be kind of interesting because if they do have a ton of young starters, and if some of them are performing and maybe Jordan is kind of isn't, then I think that they might have a decision to make there down the line. But I think that for now, I think they are committed to giving him a chance to continue to start and continue to develop. And you have to remember, I mean, he's only 28 years old, I
Yeah.
think, so still has there's still some upside there. And one of the interesting things that he told us was that, last year you kind of saw him dial back his fastball velocity a little bit because he wanted to kind of try to pace himself. But this year he said, no, I'm going to come out and I'm just going to let it eat. So, he's going to be throwing 98, 100 miles per hour from the get-go. So, and just see kind of how long he can go with that. So, because that's kind of when he is at his best, is when he's kind of lighting up the radar gun. So yeah, I mean, he's someone who could be kind of interesting if he can kind of perform. He could end up being a big part of that rotation. So yeah, I think that will definitely be one of the more interesting storylines to follow this season.
Maria, you got the manager cap on March 3rd. If Hicks is in the rotation, who is the fifth starter?
That I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest position battle that we're seeing right now. I think that as of right now, you kind of have to go with Kyle Harrison, I think. I mean, he's someone who he's kind of has that incumbent status just because I think he pitched kind of maybe the second most innings of anyone last year behind Logan Webb. And uh he was kind of pitching through a lot. Like he had the ankle issue, he had the shoulder issue at the end of the year. And you kind of saw those injuries, I think, probably affect his velocity. He's someone who we heard a ton of was just missing a ton of bats in the minors, striking out a ton of guys. But when he got to the majors, we didn't really see kind of that 95, 96 miles per hour from him. At some points last year, he was down in the low 90s, sometimes 80, coming in at 89, which is very concerning because his fastball has always kind of been his money pitch. So that was a little concerning, but I think the fact that he was able to grind it out and still, for the most part, be out there for the Giants and be pretty effective at times, I think that's a good sign for someone who's only 23 years old. So he's another guy who spent the winter kind of just getting his shoulder, back to where it needed to be. He was a little behind schedule this spring because he got sick, but he looked pretty good in his first start of the spring the other day. His velocity was kind of 91, 92, touching 93, but he said he's still kind of building up and he isn't kind of trying to come in and throw hard from the start just because he knows it's a long season and he kind of needs to ease his way into it. So I'm going to go with Kyle, but I have to say Landon Roop is kind of really making he's making a really strong case right now. I think he probably has had the one of the strongest starts of anyone this spring. I think he has like 5 scoreless inning and 8 strikeouts over his first 2 appearances. He's also someone who could obviously slide into the bullpen, which is where he started the season last year. But I think the Giants so far have a lot of good options, but I think that Kyle would kind of have to pitch his way out of that job right now.
And my last question, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, when your hand is raised and I call on you, please tell Maria where you're from so she gets a sense of where everybody's from here. Uh, Maria, you mentioned Kyle Harrison and K's. What's very disheartening is that I'm seeing again in spring training that the Giants offense is striking out just a ridiculous amount of times. What are they going to do to fix this? Can they do anything?
Yeah, I think that's one of their kind of goals for this season is to be a little bit more dynamic and to obviously just have more ways to score because I think last year, I mean, one of their biggest issues was they really kind of struggled with situational hitting and driving in runners with obviously getting hits with runners in scoring position and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think that I think they should get a big boost from the return of Jung-Hoo Lee. He's obviously someone who's kind of known for his contact skills. And Luis Matos kind of has a similar skill set in that regard. So I think that those two guys are pieces of the lineup that could really help in that regard. Especially Jung-Hoo Lee, who Bob Melvin has said that he kind of wants to. He's kind of he likes the idea of having him in the three hole. So he's someone who I think could really be kind of a spark plug for that offense because he didn't really show what he could do last year since he suffered that shoulder injury maybe like 37 games into his rookie season. So I think he's someone who can really be kind of an X factor for this team if he's able to um, just be the guy that he was in Korea. And that's when he was kind of winning. He's hit 300 every season. Was really probably the best offensive player in that league. So they're really going to need him, I think, to take a step forward and establish himself this year if they want that offense to continue to improve.
Thank you so much. The man with the golden pipes makes his return. Mr. Taylor, you're up.
I'm Dan Taylor. I'm from Fresno, California. Quick question. I'm hearing the Giants have real concerns about what the playing conditions will be like at the park in Sacramento this year, so much so that they're leaning toward putting some of their top prospects, Eldridge and a few others, at Richmond. Fact, fiction, what are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously going to be an interesting situation to monitor. I think that they did decide to keep the rather than go with artificial turf, which I think was maybe the initial plan. I know they're going to go with have natural grass, which I think will be a little bit of a better playing surface for those guys. But yeah, I mean, there is concern as far as how the field is going to hold up, just because there isn't really going to be much of a chance for the groundskeepers to kind of keep be able to do like normal maintenance just because there isn't going to be like a road series where they have off. They could just like go in and patch things up. So, and Sacramento is already going to be kind of a tough environment to play in just because in the summers, obviously it's so hot. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think, with Eldridge specifically, actually, I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants decided to start him at Double A Richmond just because, he actually hasn't only played about 17 games above high A Eugene, and he's actually from Virginia, so I don't think it would be the worst thing for him to kind of go back there. He's someone who probably needs a little bit more development anyway. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's it is going to be an interesting situation to see how this first season of sharing that field with the A's goes. There's obviously a lot of other improvements that need to be made to that field to kind of get it up to major league standards. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a big question mark for everyone. I know when they had that FanFest event in Sacramento in January, a lot of the players were kind of wondering if the field would actually be ready in time for the start of the season because they were still like building clubhouses and doing all these other things. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how that situation plays out.
Thank you. Have a great season.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Ken Hogarty, you are up.
Hi, Maria. How are you? My name is Ken. I'm live in the East Bay. I was a San Francisco high school principal for years. And my question has to do with the catching. I love Patrick Bailey, although I'm concerned that he wears down so much in the second half of the seasons. But they had that guy, Tom Murphy, that they got. I'm wondering what his status is and what's going on with Huff and Stassi and who you think the second string catcher. Of course, always in the back of the mind is the idea that boy, Joey Bart had a great season last year. He would have been a good second catcher, but I guess that ship has sailed. So the question is, what do you think will happen behind Patrick Bailey with the Giants catching this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that was kind of a question mark just heading into spring training, just because we knew that, Tom Murphy is someone who has really had trouble staying on the field over his career. I think the whole reason that they brought him in was because they really because he has kind of a track record of being really successful against left-handed pitching, and they really like the idea of pairing him with Patrick Bailey. But then obviously he suffered that knee injury last year, and he really struggled to kind of get over that. I don't think he ever got to the point where he really felt comfortable kind of getting back into the squad, which is obviously not great for a catcher. But he said he finally was able to kind of successfully rehab it over the winter. But then, he got to spring training. I think it was like the first workout of pitchers and catchers. He felt his back start to tighten up. And turns out he has a herniated disc in his back. So he ended up getting like an epidural injection, I think. So he's going to be down for quite a while. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be ready for opening day, which kind of throws that whole battle for the backup spot competition wide open. The two front runners there, as you mentioned, are obviously Sam Huff, who's on the 40-man roster after being claimed off Rangers or off waivers from the Rangers, and Max Stassi, who is a non-roster invitee, but Stassi is obviously someone who has, I think, 10 years of big league experience. He's really known for his framing, which the Giants really like. But he also hasn't played in the big league since 2022. And he's also someone who's coming off like hip surgery. So I think that for me personally, I think Huff is probably going to be the guy who is probably the front runner to start behind Bailey, just because he's out of options. So the Giants can't send him to the minors without, exposing him to waivers. So it could in a way be kind of another Joey Bart situation where they actually hold on to the guy and, give him a chance to stick here. He has some really interesting power, which I think you already saw in their first spring game against the Rangers, his former club. And he's a really nice kid. It seems like the pitchers really like throwing to him so far. Robbie Ray was really complimentary of working with him yesterday. So I think that for now, yeah, Sam Huff, I think, is in a good spot to potentially make the team. And Max Stassi, I think he's actually like from the Sacramento area. So I think he's someone who would actually be open to maybe going to AAA Sacramento, even if he doesn't make the team. And, potentially staying in the organization and kind of giving them like a little bit more depth there, which is what you want, when you bring someone in on a minor league deal. So that's kind of my view of the catching situation right now.
Thank you. I enjoy your writing too. Thank you.
Maria, why don't you tell everybody where they could find you on X or whatever?
Yeah, I'm actually not posting a ton on Twitter these days, but you can find me on Blue Sky if anyone else is on Blue Sky. So it's just MI Guardado at
And then, of course, you could find on the MLB
yes.
our articles on the Giants. Mr. Russ, you are up.
All right. I'm Russ. I'm from San Carlos, and I am the #1 tour guide at Oracle Park. My question is, how long do the Giants plan on going with Wade and Yastrzemski this year? I think Yaz is a fine fourth outfielder, Stan Javier clone, but I just think that there's hopefully some other options down the line on, especially Yaz and Wade.
It's a fair question. Obviously both of those guys are going to be free agents at the end of the season. So I think it probably is fair to say that, their tenure with the Giants is probably winding down at this point. Yastrzemski is obviously their longest tenured position player, kind of an incredible story. But obviously the Giants have a ton of young outfielders who are coming up in the organization. Elliot Ramos is going to be the main guy in left field. Jung-Hoo Lee is going to be the main guy in center. As of right now, Yastrzemski looks like the primary right fielder, but Luis Matos is someone who had a huge season in the Winter League in Venezuela, and he hasn't really put it together yet in the majors, but he's still only 23. And then Marco Luciano, obviously, who transitioned to the outfield this year, and he's someone who we really haven't seen kind of break out yet, but I think that this move is probably going to be good for him when it comes to unlocking his bat. So yeah, I mean, I think Yastrzemski has been really solid for, ever since he's been a Giant. But I think that if there some of these young guys kind of start to perform and start establishing them in the majors, then I think it's going to be pretty easy to kind of maybe start shifting Yastrzemski's role a little bit, making more of a complementary piece rather than kind of a main piece. So yeah, I mean, and he's a guy who's I think he's gonna be 35 in August, so he's really gonna need to show that he can still be kind of a valuable guy because the Giants will have a lot of other options if they kind of want to move on from him. And then when it comes to Wade, I was actually pretty surprised that the Giants didn't add a free agent first baseman over the offseason just because that's a position where they really didn't get a ton of production last year, just given that, Wade struggled with injuries, Wilmer Flores struggled with injuries. And they obviously have Bryce Eldridge on the way, but he's someone who is still going to need some time in the minors. So I don't feel like it wouldn't have been the worst thing to kind of bring in a veteran option to kind of maybe upgrade that position a little bit and put the Giants in a position where they didn't necessarily need to rush Eldridge. But yeah, I mean, I think with Wade, he's someone who they obviously really value his on base skills. I think before he got hurt last year, he had something like a 470 on base percentage, which is ridiculous. That's like truly elite. And I think we saw his power kind of dip just because he didn't really have his legs under him, but he's healthy now. He's he hit a home run the other day, and which I think is a pretty positive sign for him just to see some of that power show up, early in the spring. But I think that, with him there, bringing him back, I mean, I think that it just kind of gives the Giants some flexibility to, like I said, not necessarily have to rush Eldridge, but if Eldridge does kind of continue to zoom through the minors and shows that he's ready, then I think that there's not really going to be a lot standing in his way for the Giants to promote him and make him kind of their first baseman in the future. So I think for now, both Yaz and Wade are kind of more, um, kind of, you know, holding the spots a little bit, I guess. But I think that, by the end of the season, we might see, they might not be here or, the Giants, they might be more complementary pieces, like I said.
Well, yeah, they're basically starters by default because they're just as nobody else. And lastly, real quick, my friend Joan, who's also a tour guide, is listening in, and so she says she disagrees with my assessment. So anyway, thanks a lot.
No
I think
problem.
that was your assessment of being the #1 tour guide, Russ.
Yes, that's right.
Jeff Cohen, you're up.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, Maria. Yeah, I'm Jeff from Long Island, New York, and I want to talk about my guy who I've been following since he was 16, 17 years old, and that's Wilmer Flores. Could you tell me what's the prognosis is for this season? I know he's on a last year of his contract. Is this the last ride for Wilmer?
Yeah, he's another guy who, is kind of obviously he's coming off kind of the worst season of his career, but to be fair, he was pretty compromised last year. I think that knee issue really kind of hampered him all year. He ended up requiring some sort of procedure last August. Um, and he told us when we talked to him last month that he was always kind of told to play through injuries and things like that. But he probably took it a little too far last year. It probably would have benefited him to maybe get that knee taken care of a little bit earlier. But he did have his that player option in his contract, which kind of allowed him to come back for another season in San Francisco. And yeah, a lot of people aren't really talking about him, but I feel like he's someone who has been a pretty consistent offensive performer over his career. He's someone who obviously kills lefties. So as of right now, I mean, he's going to be, Lamont Wade's platoon partner at first base, but yeah, I mean, I think there is going to be some pressure on him, I think, to perform, especially early on, just because, yeah, I mean, the Giants have Lamont, they have Gerard Encarnacion, who has looked really good, and there's some kind of overlap in their skill sets right now. So I think both of them are still going to be on the team, but I think that if Wilmer kind of doesn't show that he can still be that guy, then it's going to be interesting to see how much rope the Giants give him, because I think that he is going to be a free agent at the end of the year, so they don't necessarily have to ride him like they have in years past. But yeah, I mean, Wilmer, it's hard not to root for Wilmer. He's someone who obviously has been a fan favorite in a bunch of markets for a reason. He's a really good guy, so hopefully he'll be able to kind of show that he still has something left in the tank. But he's really going to have to, perform to kind of keep his roster spot, I think.
Well, I hope so. He's a good guy, and I know he's playing for a contract, and I hope he has a couple more years left. Thank you,
Yeah,
Maria.
no problem.
Some of you do not know how to use the yellow hand. So Jeff, I have your hand raised, Jeff, the other Jeff, okay? Harvey Weinberg, you are up.
Maria, I love your stuff. I'm one of those New Yorkers. I'm still a New Yorker. I saw my first game when I was 8 in 1954. Willie Mays was 23. I'll tell you how old I am, but there's a Star Trekian thing here because when I started rooting for my New York baseball Giants, the New York football Giants had a middle linebacker named Sam Huff. And I'm glad to see that Sam has transposed the time and is now playing backup catcher for the baseball Giants.
That's
I love
great.
your stuff.
Thank
I have
you.
a quick question. You did a piece on Bryce Eldridge learning how to play first base, and a 6'7" guy getting down, getting his glove into the dirt, and he was being mentored by JT Snow. JT was a great defender. I'm wondering if Will Clark, who was also a great defender and is on the Giants staff in some capacity. I wonder if Will has an input in Bryce's learning how to play first base.
Yeah, he does. I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure Will spent some time with Bryce last summer when they were at Eugene. And I think Bryce was telling us that he thought it was like hilarious because his dad thought it was so cool that he was like, hanging out with Will Clark. Um, so I think like everyone, like his parents, they're all really jealous because they're big fans of Will Clark. So yes, but I think Will actually had a knee replacement surgery last month, so he's actually
Oh,
has been at spring training, which is why that the Giants decided to invite. Well, I think it's partly why the Giants decided to reach out to JT Snow, who obviously six-time Gold Glove winner, and they invited him to come out and work with Bryce for a week. But yeah, no, I think Will is definitely still around. He's someone who often kind of goes around to all the minor league affiliates to kind of check in with all the prospects. So he is also been someone who has been a resource for him and will probably continue to be a resource for him. So yeah, there are a lot of people working with Bryce to kind of try to get him up to speed on his defense because while his bat is really advanced, he is still fairly new at first base just because he pitched a lot in high school. He was a designated hitter a lot in high school. So he's still kind of just learning the position, which is why he's probably a little bit more far, or I think that's why he's not like in contention to make the opening day roster out of spring trading right now. But yeah, so it's funny, every morning you kind of see at least last week you saw Matt Williams, Ron Wotus, JT Snow just really working really hard with Bryce Eldridge on his defense and just drilling down on all the fundamentals. So yeah, a lot of good people who are putting in a lot of a lot of their time into try to make Bryce better.
if you see Will, tell him that this whole group wants him to get better. He was a guest a couple of years ago here. He's dynamic. He's wonderful. Thank you, Maria. Good luck.
Yeah, no problem.
Maria, Will did a Zoom from his truck after shooting animals.
Trucking in the wilds of Arkansas after wild boar hunting.
Yeah,
He was a hoot.
yeah, I can imagine.
John Burbridge, you're up.
Hi, Maria. It's great having you with us. I'm from South Central Pennsylvania, but I grew up in Jersey City and was an avid reader of the Jersey Journal and the Newark Star Ledger. And you mentioned the Ledger before. I was sad to hear they ended their print edition just recently. My question is Encarnacion, is he going to be the DH? And if not, who? And the question I saw a game the other day, and I saw this fellow playing shortstop, Koss. Does he have a chance to stick?
Yeah, so I'll start with Encarnacion. Yeah, I think right now he is like the candidate to be kind of the primary designated hitter. I think for the most part, the Giants don't really, or at least they kind of want to keep that position a little bit flexible, just because like last year they obviously signed Jorge Soler and kind of made them that their primary DH, but I think they kind of missed having the ability to just kind of cycle some guys in and out there when they wanted to give them like a little bit of a like a half day off. I think that They kind of want to keep that option open this year. So while they will have probably someone like Encarnacion get like most of the at bats there, they still want to be able to give Matt Chapman, a day there if he kind of they want to get him off his feet, but still keep him in the lineup. They're probably going to do a little bit more of that this year. But Encarnacion has looked, like I said, he's looked really good at the plate. He's looked, I think he has like 10 RBIs in 6 games, and he's someone who I think was playing in winter ball in the Dominican Republic. So I think he kind of came in, probably and was probably a little bit more ready to hit than some other guys. But yeah, I mean, I think last year, we showed that he has some really interesting power. He hits the ball really hard. His exit velocities are always crazy. So he's someone who could be a little bit more, if he can continue to build on this, he could be kind of maybe a late bloomer who could, be kind of a surprising bat in that lineup. So I think that's where kind of the designated hitter situation stands right now. Christian Koss, he's also someone who's definitely turning heads. He was making highlight reel plays against the Dodgers the other day. And he's someone who could probably provide depth kind of all around the infield. I think the one thing that's maybe working against him right now is just the fact that he's a right-handed hitter, and they're already so right-handed in the infield. They have Matt Chapman, Willie Adames, Tyler Fitzgerald. So I think that if when you look at kind of who they might carry on their bench, I think that Brett Wisely probably has the advantage there just because he's a left-handed bat, and they probably would want to have more left-handed options off the bench. But yeah, I mean, I think that they've really been impressed with what they've seen from Christian Koss. So it wouldn't surprise me if he ended up getting an opportunity to fill in the infield at some point, because I think that they have been really impressed with what they've seen from him so far.
Yeah, I really liked what he did in the field against the Dodgers. That was quite something. And you just convinced me to take Encarnacion to my fantasy league. Okay, thank you very much. Bye now.
Charles Fracchia.
Yeah, I'm from San Francisco, born and raised. I had two questions. One was a quick. Do you think Matos looks like kind of the real deal? His offseason looks spectacular. And the other question I had is, how is Fitzgerald doing transitioning from shortstop to second base?
Yeah, I'll start with Matos. Yeah, I think that, I think it's really tough for young players to kind of have to go up and down a lot. And I think that's something that kind of really affected him last year. Just because you saw obviously that, he had that week when he was the National League Player of the Week, he had an unreal weekend. I think he set like a record for like most RBIs in like 3 games or whatever. But then after that, he didn't really get a lot of runway, and he ended up being sent back down to AAA. So there's a lot it's really hard for kind of young players to have to deal with that. So I think that the hope is that this year he'll have a little bit more of a shot to really establish himself. And I think right now he's probably the front runner to kind of be that fourth outfielder, and be paired with Yastrzemski. Maybe at first he'll get most of his starts against left-handed pitching, but he shows that he can kind of perform. I think there is going to be an opportunity for him to get a little bit more playing time. And yeah, I mean, he's someone who's 23. There's still so much.
His winter league numbers were like unreal. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, good.
Yeah.
Hoping that he had kind of turned the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was playing for Ozzie Guillen, who I'm sure he learned a lot from. And there's some things going on in his personal life too. He just had a baby, I think, last week.
Oh,
His parents finally got a visa to come over from Venezuela. So I think him kind of having that support network now off the field too is something that can maybe give him some peace of mind and just kind of allow him to flourish a little bit more on the field. So yeah, I mean, he's someone who they've obviously really liked ever since they signed him as a teenager, and I think it was 2018. And he has some really interesting contact skills. I think that one thing that's interesting with him is that he kind of came up as a center fielder, but he hasn't really looked that good defensively there. Um, so, and he has had some struggles defensively as well. So I feel like for him, it's going to be really important for him to kind of just for him to really hit, because I feel like he can't really lean on his defense now to be kind of his calling card. So, but I think that he has the potential to just take another step forward, and show that he can be a big league hitter and a regular for the Giants. And then as far as Fitzgerald goes, he's someone who was obviously who ended last season as the team's everyday shortstop. But then, they went out and signed Willie Adames. So it was really clear that he was going to have to move off the position. But, they have a spot for him at second base. So I think that he's going to do well there. I mean, he's someone who's obviously super athletic. Last year he kind of opened the season as a super utility player and was playing all over, but I think it's going to be really good for him to just be able to stick at one spot, really get comfortable. And I think the fact that he's gonna have Willie Adames and Matt Chapman playing to his left is really gonna help him. It's gonna help everyone probably. Um, and I think that you saw last year, like once he settled in at shortstop, that's kind of when he started to also go off at the plate. And that was after when he had that really huge week where he was basically Barry Bonds. So
Yeah, he got really consistent once he was like one
yeah,
position, and
yeah.
oh,
So I think he's excited to just not have to carry all these gloves with him. I think I think he has the potential to be a really good second baseman because I think that, I don't think he's gonna have to hit much to be kind of one of the best second basemen in the league because that position has, it's good. There isn't a lot of offense out of that position league wide, and he does have the potential to be an impact bat there. So, yeah, I think that they're pretty high on him, and I think that he's excited about the opportunity to settle in there.
and how's Luciano doing? I meant to ask about him as well because he had such an kind of inconsistent year last year, and they'd put him in out defensively in the late innings, and then he'd flub one, and it's like, oh God, not again, kind of. So how's he doing?
Yeah, so I think he's looked better than I expected in the outfield. I mean, he's someone who obviously came up as a shortstop, but even when he was younger, there was a lot of skepticism around scouts about, no one really expected him to stick on the infield, and I think
Hmm.
that, the Giants were kind of stubborn about, keeping him on the infield as long as
Right,
he could, and then, they kind of saw that he was going to be a defensive liability, whether it be at shortstop or second base. So that's kind of what, eventually convinced them to move him out into the outfield. But like I think he's looked okay. I think he's obviously still going to need a lot of reps there to get comfortable. But in the outfield, you have a lot more time to react to balls and things like that.
right,
So I think he'll be okay in the long run. I think he's probably going to open the season at AAA Sacramento just so he can get a little bit more reps there, get a little bit more comfortable there. But if he's playing left field, it's not going to be, I don't think the learning curve is going to be that steep for him. He's someone who's still pretty athletic and he's 23, so
right,
still a lot of potential there. And I think the hope is that, if they by moving him there, they kind of hope to unlock something with the bat. Um, and I think you're already kind of seeing a little bit more that he had like this massive home run against the Angels. So there's a lot of power in that bat. And it hasn't shown up in the majors yet because I don't think he's hit a home run in the majors since he's debuted. But yeah, I think that, there's a reason that he was really super highly touted when he from the moment he signed with the Giants. And I think that
right.
he hasn't shown his best yet, but I think that, he's another potential breakout candidate, I think, if he can just get comfortable there and finally kind of put it all together.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us as well.
We're gonna go to Steve, then Jeff, then Rich, and then Mike. Uh, Rothy, you are up.
Hey, great presentation. I grew up in Upper Manhattan, about 3 miles north of the Polo Grounds, and then I ended up teaching about less than 2 miles from the Polo Grounds for 35 years. My school was the one that was used by Bruce Willis in the Die Hard movie where they bombed the school. So you can figure that out. Like some of the guys in here, this is my 71st year rooting for the Giants. Some of my questions were answered. My one question is, if the season started tomorrow, who would be the 8 people in the field? Your
All right.
opinion. Your opinion.
I guess if it's opening day, you got Logan Webb on the mound, you have Patrick Bailey behind the plate, Lamont Wade at first, Tyler Fitzgerald at second, Willie Adames at shortstop, Matt Chapman at third base, Elliot Ramos in left, Jung Hoo Lee in center, and Mike Yastrzemski in right field, I think.
Ramos will be okay for the
Yeah,
open.
I think so. I think he's been slowed down a little bit by he had an oblique issue, but I think he's trending towards potentially playing tomorrow. So I think that there's still enough time for him to get up
Good.
to get ready.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
And your DH in Encarnacion.
Yes, yeah.
Jeff, you were up.
Okay. I'm Jeff. I'm from Floral Park, New York. Been a Giant fan since 1955, when I was 8 years old. I love the left side of the infield, but I'm concerned that they seem to be the only two power bats in the lineup. I respect Posey a lot. I loved him as a player, not just because his physical abilities, but he was an intelligent ball player. And I like to think that he tried maybe to either sign a free agent corner outfielder or trade for one, but with no success. Is that a concern that really, or am I wrong that there are other power bats other than Chapman and Adames?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're really kind of counting on that improvement to come from within. I mean, I think if you look at someone like Elliot Ramos, I mean, I think he's someone who showed he could be an impact bat last year. So he'll be looking obviously to build off his All-Star campaign. But I think he's someone who's definitely going to be a big part of that, the heart of their lineup moving forward. Like Gerard Encarnacion, like I said, if he can continue to build on this, I think he's going to be really interesting. Like I said, he hits the ball really hard, and that's not the end all be all, but I think it's a really good side of just the fact that he's able to make quality contact, and do damage when he gets his pitches. So I think that those two could definitely help deepen that lineup. And then Tyler Fitzgerald, I think, is someone who maybe didn't get, or he had a really great rookie season, and he's someone who's shown a lot of power in the minors. So I think that he's another guy who can continue to take steps forward. But I think it is fair that they could have definitely used kind of another impact bat. I think that at one point they were kind of rumored to be in on the Kyle Tucker situation. So I think they probably did try to kind of upgrade that lineup, and maybe things just didn't. They probably didn't have the pieces to kind of land someone like Kyle Tucker, but I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily for a lack of trying.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Richard Quickie, you are up. Rich, unmute. Rich, can you unmute? There you go.
Hi, Maria. I'm from New Orleans, and you have a New Orleanian on your coaching staff, JP Martinez, and I'm curious as to did how was that a big is that a big step for JP to go into that role, and do you think he'll make many changes from last year?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously he's someone who had been on the coaching staff now for a few years, and I think the fact that he was, um, he was actually one of the few guys who kind of survived the managerial change, and I think that's always kind of a good sign when there's a change of leadership, but they choose to hold on to you. I think that just kind of shows that the players respect you, the front office respects you, and they really value kind of what you can bring to the table. So I think I think it was something that it just made sense. It made sense that he would be the guy to come in and replace Brian Price.
He's
And yeah,
bilingual as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
he speaks some
Yeah.
Spanish, so that obviously allows him to connect with guys like Camilo Doval, Randy Rodriguez. So he's someone who could definitely kind of connect with everyone on that pitching staff. And it seems like the pitchers like working with him so far. He's an interesting guy. Susan Slusser had a really good profile of him the other day. I don't know if you guys saw it, but really interesting background. I think it's funny is that I think he's the same age as Justin Verlander,
Oh,
but he's really, yeah, he knows his stuff, and I think he's always kind of giving guys tips on, small tweaks they can do, whether it be kind of a grip change, moving on the rubber, anything like that. He's really invested in these guys' careers and helping them get better. And yeah, so I think that he's going to be someone who is really going to be a really big resource for these guys. So I think it just made sense to elevate him. I wasn't really surprised to see him. I think it was definitely well earned.
thanks.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Michael Berlin. Maria, are we okay with time for a few more?
Yeah, of course.
Terrific. Mike, go ahead.
One easy one a little more complicated. I'm Michael. I grew up in Brooklyn. I live in Los Angeles, obviously in enemy territory. Casey Schmidt, where's he going to end up? And two, how do you deal with it? This is a bigger question, but how do we deal with the billion-dollar team? The Dodgers just keep spending, and I feel like the season didn't start yet, and I'm thinking, God, how do we compete with these guys? And I love the Giants.
Yeah, I'll start with Casey. He's someone he's it's interesting because when he was coming up through the minors, everyone talked about his Gold Glove potential at third base, and the one guy that he was always compared to was Matt Chapman. And then obviously the Giants went out and signed Matt Chapman, not only for the 1 year, but then to the long-term extension last September. And so that kind of put him in a tough spot because now he's kind of blocked from his best position. And obviously now they have Willie Adames at shortstop too, so now he's blocked from that position. So he's someone who I think now is kind of realizing that in order to fit on this roster, he kind of just needs to be a guy who can play multiple positions at a high level. So I think that, he started to get more comfortable at second base, and he's still, taking reps kind of all over the infield. But yeah, I mean, it is a little bit unfortunate because like I said, I mean, he's not going to be able to play third or short for the Giants probably just because Chapman and Adames play every day. They've been extremely durable throughout their careers. So, for right now, he's essentially kind of vying for a backup infield spot. But I think just the fact that he's right-handed kind of puts him at a little bit of a disadvantage. So he's someone who could honestly be a trade candidate for this team, I think, just because, he is, I think, a major league caliber third baseman, and he's not going to have the opportunity to really play every day here, it seems, unless there's like some sort of injury to Matt Chapman. So I think that he's someone that, he might be a good, like I said, a trade piece for someone because I think that there will be a team who will be willing to kind of give him that opportunity that he doesn't necessarily have here right now. And then as far as, the Dodgers go, I mean, it's kind of been a conversation, league wide, right? How can teams compete with the billion-dollar Dodgers? I think for the Giants specifically, I mean, I think that the only way that if they can't kind of match them when it comes to maybe having that type of payroll, I think just being better at development is where they're going to have to really try to invest a lot of their time and resources because I think that the way that they're going to be able to make themselves competitive for a long time is to just have kind of another core of homegrown players that they can lean on for years. And I think that the one thing that the Dodgers obviously they have a lot of money, but I think that the one thing that they've also excelled at has been developing guys. And I think that the Giants, we really haven't seen that, especially under Farhan Zaidi. I think that that was one of the things that they brought him in to do. And we saw them kind of miss on a lot of their first rounders. Obviously guys like Hunter Bishop, Will Bednar, even like Reggie Crawford recently, they haven't really panned out. Bryce Eldridge is the guy who I think could potentially reverse that trend a little bit. But I think for them to stay competitive moving forward, it's all going to come down to drafting, developing players, and just having a really consistent pipeline of talent. So I think that that's really what it's going to come down to. Near term is going to be kind of tough just because the Dodgers they're stacked. They have a ton of money. It's almost World Series or bust for them every year. But I think the Giants they're going to have to really focus their, like I said, on developing their own guys because I think that that's going to be really the way that they can kind of try to close that gap a little bit.
My fingers are crossed.
Norm, take us home.
Okay, hi Maria. I'm Norm Coleman. I was born in San Francisco. I live in Millbrae. I just want you to know that every morning I wake up and the first thing I do is go to my email to see if your column is there. And it's a pleasure putting a voice to your words now. And so I want to follow up on the pipeline. And other than Koss and Eldridge, I'm curious about position players that we haven't seen before who very well might be on the Giants this year at some point in time.
Yeah, it's kind of tough just because I feel like they really graduated a lot of their top position players recently. Like, we always saw Luciano, we always saw Matos, we always saw, Bailey, guys like that. We always saw Fitzgerald last year. So I feel like the guys who are kind of now on the cusp are more so pitchers. So they obviously they have the three Carsons, Carson Whisenhunt, Carson Ragsdale, Carson Seymour. I feel like they're kind of the ones that are probably the closest prospects to debuting. As far as like kind of the next wave of position players, um, they have a young catcher named Adrian Sugaste who's been kind of in the organization for a while, and just I think given the fact that they are a little light in the catching department, I think he's someone who might have a chance to debut, at some point, maybe this year. But yeah, then you have guys like Diego Velasquez, who's kind of an infielder. I think he reached Double A Richmond last year, but there's kind of a little bit of a gap right now when it comes to like the guys that are now kind of on the majors, and the guys that are kind of the next wave. You obviously have Eldridge, but then Rainer Arias is a guy who I know that they're really high on, but he kind of he's really struggled to stay healthy the last couple of years, and I think he like had like two wrist fractures, so he hasn't really progressed as quickly as maybe a guy who stayed healthy would. So, but he's someone they're excited about. I know they obviously just signed the best international prospect in January of Josué Gonzalez, but he's someone who obviously is really young and is probably going to open the season like in the Dominican Republic. But so yeah, I don't think aside from Eldridge, there aren't a ton of position players who immediately come to mind who could debut this year, but they do have some interesting arms who I think that you could see.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Maria, I got one last thing to ask you. Do you notice a breath of fresh air in the new regime versus the old regime?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is. I think the vibes are a little bit different. I think that the one thing that you saw under Farhan Zaidi was that there maybe wasn't as much of an effort to kind of maybe maintain kind of that connection with the Giants' like really rich history, especially their recent history of winning all those three World Series at the beginning of the last decade. In fact, you even saw them kind of remove some of the references to those championships, like in the clubhouse and things like that. And obviously that's completely changed now that Buster Posey is the guy at the top. He's obviously such an integral piece of those World Series teams. And I think that it's been really important for him to kind of reestablish that history with the Giants, and try to kind of create that winning culture that they had, not too long ago. And I think that you're kind of seeing him maybe bring in kind of some of those guys who were key parts of that team too. And I think if you just look at kind of the list of the guest instructors that they have this spring, it's guys like Marco Scudero, it's Yusmeiro Petit, Javi Lopez, Hunter Pence, Ryan Vogelsong. So he's obviously a guy who has a lot of who kind of understands the history of the Giants and really wants to establish kind of a clear identity for the team moving forward, and just remind them of the fact that the Giants are one of the winningest franchises in baseball history. So I think that there is a little bit of a more of appreciation for the Giants and for their really rich history under Buster Posey.
So you think this is going to be a turnaround in the next couple of years?
I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
We're hoping. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for Maria Guardado. Maria, fabulous. Please don't be a stranger here. You're always welcome. Okay.
Of course. Thank you for having me. This was great.
And I hope you realize that not everybody has to live in San Francisco to really follow this team, because we are very much a diehard group here. So looking forward to the season. All right, guys, we'll reconvene next Wednesday. I'll hang around if anybody wants to chat. But again, let's give it up one more time for Maria Guardado. Maria, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Maria.
Everybody have a great night, and
Thank you, Maria.
we'll see you guys next week. Good night.